Hey everybody, welcome back to Player Development. Today we're joined by Jamie Field. She's an athletic trainer for USL League 2 soccer team, Lionsbridge FC, based here locally out of Newport News, Virginia. And we're going to be talking about her story with mental health today, as well as what she sees on a regular basis dealing with these professional athletes with mental health and also physical health. Welcome, Jamie.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome. So, talk a little bit about your personal journey with mental health and what does that look like for you day to day now?
Yeah. So unfortunately, the common theme, and I feel like a lot of females, but everyone nowadays, I have
Hmm.
anxiety. I didn't get diagnosed for about 5 years, I think, after first having symptoms, so to speak, of it. I was
That's
in
a
high
long
school.
time.
Um, yeah, yeah. I can't say that I would recommend going that long, but I did learn a lot about myself in that time frame.
Hmm.
It was also 2012 when I first started dealing with it. And
Hmm.
not that mental health had the same stigma it did, say, like 30 years ago, but it still wasn't nearly as open, I guess,
Hmm.
as you could say it is now. So I was scared that if I saw anyone, they would throw me into a mental hospital, which now that I'm older and looking back is a complete joke. But at the time, I genuinely did not feel like I had like self control over my brain. And that to me would be a criteria for sending someone to a mental hospital. I didn't realize the extent to what other people might experience that would truly be that criteria. But, anyways, it took me a long time to seek out professional help. So that happened when I was in college. I basically got to the point where it was affecting me a lot more physically than it ever had, and I was starting to be unable to function. So I actually went to my athletic training professors, and they set me up with just a general practitioner who officially diagnosed me with general anxiety disorder. And then I we discussed medication at that time, but decided we would start with just therapy first, and if I still was needing something else after that, then to add medication, which I didn't feel like I needed. I kind of got past that um, major episode, I guess you could say, because in my layman's terms, there's ups and downs of anxiety, right? So
Sure.
I was on a big downswing. Um, anyways, fast forward a couple years, and I was unfortunately diagnosed with cancer, and that really gets you when you have anxiety. So
Yeah,
it was
probably
actually one
not
of
so
my
good for the
oncologists.
anxiety.
No, no. Even though I had a very treatable cancer, it was still very nerve-wracking. And even to this day, I've been cancer-free for almost 2 years now, but it's still a little nerve-wracking knowing that I have a higher risk of it coming back or a different cancer coming. Anyways, it was an oncologist of mine who was like, "You have a lot on your plate, and I have a medicine that can help you. And you don't have, so we can take something off your plate." So I've been on a very low dose of an anxiety medicine since 2019, and shockingly, haven't had many issues with my anxiety. So, anyways, I, for lack of a better word, am still thankful for my experience with it, because I have experienced panic attacks, and I do um, relate to how the anxiety thought process works. And that helps a lot in my field because when I have athletes that are dealing with those same things, I don't immediately think, like, well, just calm down, or why are you so nervous? Because I understand that the logical side of their brain probably is telling them I shouldn't be this worked up about this, but yet I am. And so trying to be logical with someone who has anxiety or is in like an acute
Yeah.
panic attack or something of that sense, you can't be logical because anxiety isn't logical. Panic attacks aren't logical, at least in my experience.
Yeah. And you were saying
Yeah.
that you were seeing physical signs in college. How was anxiety affecting you physically?
Um, Well, from the beginning, I always would almost get paralyzed. It happened a lot while I was trying to fall asleep, and I felt like I couldn't move. My entire body would get stiff,
Hmm.
and it was really weird because I think if I really, really wanted to, I could move, but it's like my brain couldn't override itself to let me just roll over in bed or something. Like people be like, read a book or you can text me when that's happening. I'm like, you don't understand. I can't roll over to get to that. But as I got older, it kind of progressed in how I experienced it. So in college, when it got really bad, I was just having a really hard time sleeping. So during the day, it was so hard for me to pay attention in class because I was so exhausted. I couldn't fall asleep. I would like jolt awake, and I would feel like I was getting suffocated. So I'd like wake up like kind
Hmm.
of like shaking my head, trying to like get someone off of me. I still sometimes I can tell when I'm maybe unaware of my anxiety. I like feel like I can't breathe, so I'm like sitting there trying to almost yawn before I can feel like I get a full breath. I know I'm breathing because I'm not getting lightheaded, I'm not passed out or anything, but I just feel like I'm not getting the air that I need. And, we've looked into other actual breathing conditions. It's not asthma, it's not anything like that. It's just a really weird, like, breathing mechanism. But, and then I just would feel jittery. Like, I'd shake. I looked like I was cold and shivering,
Uh-huh.
but I wasn't cold. So, yeah,
Wow.
weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's one part that gets overlooked sometimes in mental health is that as you were dealing with the anxiety, on top of that, you weren't able to sleep, and that makes you more vulnerable physically and mentally to
Right, it's a
other
vicious
stuff.
cycle.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So now, fast forward to today and your day to day work, you're working with these professional athletes. What are some of the issues and challenges in mental health or other areas that you see facing these athletes?
Yeah, so I should preface all this by saying the current soccer team that I work with, it's a I don't want to call it a summer league because that kind of diminishes what it is, but they only play in the summer. And we've only this season we're on week 2 right now. So I'm still getting to know the guys, and most of them when they play in this setting, it's truly because they want to be there. And at least in the previous season that I worked with them, it's in some ways a more relaxed setting, so I don't see as much mental health related stuff in this particular setting. But I mean, huge news story recently is the number of collegiate athletes that have committed suicide. It's very
Absolutely.
tragic and very sad. And I believe, if I recall, they were almost all females, or they were all females.
I haven't
Um,
tracked with
which
that.
Yeah, I know at least the last couple were females that I'm aware of, but it it truly is sad the pressure that these athletes face, and I should say the athletes that I work with, um, the league that they play in, it's USL 2, and that's their pre-professional league. So most of these guys are either currently playing college soccer or they maybe have just graduated, something of that
Mhm.
sort. And this is their stepping stone to get to play professional soccer. So as much as it is a more relaxed environment, there still is a lot of pressure, especially for the guys that have graduated. They've already played their 4 years of eligibility. This is their last chance to be seen by a professional level team.
Yeah.
Um, so there is some intensity there, and I think that's ultimately what gets to a lot of these athletes. However it manifests, whether it's depression, anxiety, eating disorder, even injuries themselves. It I feel like a lot of it, just from observation, is rooted in um, that zoning in so intensely on their sport, and that is everything in their life.
Yeah, they have a lot riding on this summer league and maybe into
Hmm.
whatever follow up seasons they play.
Hmm.
So, as an athletic trainer, I know you're not hired on to provide mental health support necessarily, but you might be one of the
Mhm.
first people that they interact with if they're having a panic attack, if they're dealing with some kind of mental health issue or struggle. So, how do you bring your experience into how you treat and work with them?
Yeah, definitely. I like I mentioned, I do find myself grateful for my own personal experience because that is the majority, if not all, of the training that I've had when it comes to mental health. I mean, we took psychology, gen psych, and sports psych classes in college, but it's very limited education, like in a practical sense. So we might understand the different disorders that these athletes could be experiencing, but at least in my experience in what I've had, much more limited on the actual application. So um, when I have athletes, because in the school year, since this soccer league runs in the summer, I'm with middle school athletes in the rest of the year, which is a very huge difference, but it keeps me on my toes and it's a lot of fun in its own way. But lots, lots of kids, then those kind of 11 to 14, usually 12 and 13, but I sometimes get 11 and 14-year olds. They're dealing with all sorts of stuff and kind of experiencing some of these things for the first time and not knowing how to deal with it. And I hate to say it, occasionally, sometimes coaches are a little bit rougher than they should be. And so I am sometimes the one that the athletes come to when they're upset because coach yelled at them. Whereas my athletes that play at this higher level, and they're mostly, we're a couple 17-year-olds, but for the most part, they're all adults. They can handle being yelled at and a little bit better than my 12-year-old girl who's never played whatever sport before and doesn't even understand the concept of the game, you know? So, anyways, getting back to your initial question, um, like I said, I think just understanding what is going through their brain, and even I've never been diagnosed with depression, but when I first had my anxiety, I would say it did put me into a bit of depression just because I was so confused as to what was going on in my brain and I couldn't understand it. And similar to anxiety, you can't tell a depressed person, well, just stop. Just
Yeah,
don't think that way. That's not how it works. So having that understanding, I typically, if I have the opportunity to speak with one of my athletes about a mental health related condition, I usually just try and be a listening ear and I um, reaffirming the positive things and okay, well, you know, I know this is really bad right now, but you're here, you're okay. We're going to get through this, that kind of thing, and then ultimately directing them to an appropriate mental health professional. But in that meantime, teaching them some of the things I've learned, like focus on something, like stare at that one book on the shelf and only let your brain think on that. Or um, in my experience, it seems like a lot of mental health conditions end up in that kind of spiraling
yeah,
thought
sure.
process. So my big thing is how do we stop the spiral? And for me, whenever I feel like I'm spiraling, and it's usually as I'm trying to fall asleep, the most convenient time of day, um, I sing in my head a very simple song that I don't even have to think about. So I might suggest Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or the ABCs, something that gives your brain just enough to focus on. It can't spend all its time spiraling, but it's easy enough. You also don't have to work so hard to remember it. Because
Yeah,
if you pick something that's too hard to remember, your brain's gonna be like, that's too hard. I'm gonna go back to spiraling because that's easier for me to do right now. So, anyways, I try and impart the tips and tricks that I've learned that I think would be harmless because, again, I'm not a mental health professional and I don't claim to be. So, the things that I've learned that from my understanding wouldn't hurt for them
yeah,
to do, like, okay, if you sing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and it doesn't work,
yeah.
nothing bad
Nothing bad's
happened.
gonna happen.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah, so one thing that you touched on was that a lot of coaches, maybe especially at the middle school level that you work at the rest of the year, with middle schoolers who may be experiencing some of this stuff for the first time, don't have a vocabulary and language to say what's going on yet. Coaches might miss the cues. So what would you say to
Hmm.
like parents or coaches or just like the management part of the team, I guess, the organizational part of the team?
Yeah.
What can those people be looking for that says, hey, maybe look in the area of mental health and this isn't just somebody who's, not willing to step out on the court or something?
Right, right. I think um, something that's lacking a lot is compassion.
Hmm.
And if we can help people learn how to look on people compassionately, I think that'll go a long way. Because without compassion and without an understanding of I'm not the most important person in the room, the number
Mm.
of times I want to be like, this is middle school. Middle school. They like we're not going for a national championship. No one's getting $100 million bonuses if they win this game. Like this is where we learn how to be better people through sports and how we improve our skills within the sport and understand the game itself better. So if a athlete, I almost said patient, if an athlete is seeming nervous, uncomfortable, or something just is not connecting, instead of thinking they're disrespecting me, they don't want to be on my team, they don't, I think there's so much self centered thinking. I mean, I do it too. It's not like I'm saying any of these people are bad people. I think it's just a very common thought process. And if they can step aside from that thought process of they're being disrespectful to me and think, well, what is going on with this kid? Is something on at home? Is mom or dad trying to get them to play this sport because they want to live vicariously through them? Or um, it could be all sorts of things. Did their best friend, were they mean at school today? Or maybe they did bad on a test. There's so many things, and people are such complex beings. We can't just shut off certain areas of our life, and we certainly can't expect a 12-year-old boy or girl to do that. Even my 18, 20-year-old kids at the soccer team, too, but they're older, more mature, and they have more skills to be able to do that. To say, okay, something not so great happened to me right before practice, but it is okay. It can stay where it is for now. I'm going to go to practice and then I'll deal with that after practice. They have a little bit more of that maturity to do that than the middle schoolers do. So I think these coaches, if they can understand, and parents as well, that they're young kids. They're learning how to balance their emotions and the things that happened with them with the different responsibilities that they have throughout the day.
Yeah, so I guess what I hear you saying is that we need to, as coaches or whoever is the adult in that situation, needs to be able to step outside of our own perspective for that moment and see what that kid might be
Hmm.
going through or might be experiencing.
Right, right.
Yeah, so, final question here: we've talked about kind of like the adult side of, or the team management side of things. What do you think athletes, at any particular level that you can pick, or at all levels, what do you think athletes should know about mental health?
I was thinking about this since you asked me to do this, and I think, first of all, they shouldn't be scared of it because it happens to just about everyone. I don't know if there's anyone that doesn't have a point in their life where they might deal with some anxiety or depression or something to that effect. Or I've met some people that had a singular panic attack and they were so caught off guard. It was like, what in the world just happened? And I used to be like, yeah, that happens to me regularly. Fortunately, not anymore. But there was a time in my life where it was like constant jitters and on edge. But I think my biggest suggestion would be to not let your sport be your life, because that's when the things that I see, whether it's in my own athletes or through observation in the news or some of my former classmates, athletes, or whatever it may be, sport has become number one in their life. And that's great. If you're talented and you can go professional, you can make a living playing the sport you love, I wouldn't suggest taking that away from anyone. But what I would propose is that if you let sport be number two or number three, something else be number one, then you might actually do better and succeed more than you ever would than when sport was number one. Because when sport is number one, what happens when you get hurt? Or what happens if you get cut from a team? Or um, COVID happens and everything gets shut down? You know, you need something else in your life to be that thing that you fall back on when sport fails you. Because eventually it will. Like, what sport can you play until you die? Maybe golf. But even then, I'm sure your game declines eventually. Tennis for a bit till your knees give out. You know, at some point in your life, you will not have your sport anymore. And that's a sad reality, but you have to be prepared for that day, whether it's tomorrow or in 20, 30 years. So I think that's the biggest thing, because that's when, if sport isn't your number one, if your coach tells you, well, to go to the Olympics in gymnastics, you have to go down 2 Leo sizes. And it's like, okay, well, am I going to starve myself, the anorexic bulimic type situation? Or do I say, you know what, as much as I would love to go to the Olympics, gymnastics isn't the most important thing in my life, and it's not worth causing long term, because guess what will last for the rest of your life if you let it? Mental health issues.
Right.
So you want your sports or you want your mental health, and you can't have both. But I think having that priority set is what will help you have both of those for long term, shall we say.